Hello again. Alright, so this is part 3, and this time we're going to work on this, what I'm calling a truss. It's a collection of I-beams, and first of all, a disclaimer, I am by no means an engineer of any sort, so this doesn't really work if it was real. These rivets are more for decoration than anything else, but I think it looks really cool, as long as you don't think too hard about it. So this is what we're going to make. It's going to use a lot of linked duplicates. It's going to use array modifiers and a few others. And then if we have time at the end, and if it's not running too long, I'll show how I made these quick bent pipes. Pretty simple. Uses a tool I don't think I've demonstrated here before, or if I have, it's been a little while. So back to focusing on this truss. I have this one reference image. Again, this is from Blackmagic Craft on YouTube. We made this Cyberpunk style diorama, which is more or less what we're replicating. Obviously, we are moving some things around and customizing it to suit our needs, but it is certainly heavily inspired by. And this image does not, this is just a screen grab from YouTube. There's not a whole lot of detail we can discern, so I've kind of made some assumptions and came out again with something that I'm actually pretty happy with. So let's dive right on into that. And I've got that scene open right here. This is where we left off with our storm drain. We've got our rig here just for scale reference. So you can kind of see we've got our garage door and some windows, blocked in a vending machine and a big light as well. But let's get to this truss. So I'm going to go in the top view first, and I want that to be kind of sitting, well, we'll start with it here, and actually I won't. I'm going to hit Shift-C. We'll just model this in the center, and we'll move it over at the end. That'll be fine. Okay, so we're going to start with a cube, and I'm going to tab into edit mode, and I'm going to move it up GZ 1 unit. This way it's sitting on the ground. Then I'm going to scale it. I'm going to hit Shift-Z, and that's going to limit or exclude the Z axis from the transformation. So I can scale it just on the X and the Y. Okay, that works the same way. You can do Shift-X to exclude the X or Shift-Y to exclude the Y. And do that. I'm going to go in the top view, and I'm just going to check my dimensions here. I want to go a little bit smaller here. So I'll scale again, Shift-Z, so it doesn't change the height. And we'll go something like that. Okay. And I'm going to take this top face, and we will hit G and Z and move it up, and I'm just going to snap it to the top of the wall so it's all roughly the same height. That works at least for now. Again, subject to change as necessary. I mean, I can refer back to my reference, and we can see kind of what I did before. And it looks like it was, yeah, about that wide, and considerably longer, which makes sense because we are going for an I-beam. So, back in edit mode here, wireframe, top view, and I'm just going to hit S to scale along the Y, whoops, hit A to select everything, SY to scale along the Y-axis, and something like that. Just kind of eyeballing it. I'm not worried too much about specific dimensions of industrial steel. Now we need to define the I-beam. So I'm going to add in a couple of edge loops and scale them apart. I'm going to show you a different way that you could do this, just kind of as an option. I can hit Command R to add an edge loop in the center, right click, and then you can bevel it, so Control B to bevel it, and that does a very similar thing. Just kind of your preference, and you can also even scroll wheel up and keep one in the center if you prefer. We'll do something like that. I think. And then, let's see, I think I'll also add an edge loop down the center. And I'm going to use one of the new features in 2.9. So I'm going to extrude it in, not quite to that center edge loop, maybe just like that. Now you can see we have this awful manifold, manifold laminar, that's what I was looking for. It's two faces that occupy the same space. It's awful terrible and a no-no. But in Blender 2.9, in the little pop-up here that comes up after you finish extruding, if we check dissolve orthogonal edges, that will come up. Or that'll get rid of those. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that this does not carry that edge flow all the way through. So if I select this face and hit G to move it, you can see there's a really weird face there. So as far as I understand, this tool is still in development. But if you use it like this, you will need to do a little bit of additional cleanup. And so I'll do that right now just so you can see what that looks like. It's going to add an edge loop right here. And when it's in slide mode, I'm going to hold down Control to temporarily turn on vertex snapping, and I'm going to snap it right there. And then I'm going to select everything, hit M, and merge by distance. See in the bottom right here, I removed two vertices. So now I can grab these faces, move them, and you can see things are as they should be. So I've done that on one side, and instead of doing that 3 more times, I'll just use a mirror modifier. Okay, so I'm going to select those faces, I'm going to select those faces, and X, and delete them, and then add in our modifier, mirror modifier. And we want to go in the X, and we want to go in the Y direction, turn on clipping, and we can collapse that modifier. Okay, so there is our I-beam. Now before we start doing a bunch more things, let's add in our control loops and a subsurface modifier. So alternate way to add that subsurface modifier is Control 2 with it selected, and that will add it in. Now obviously we need a lot of control loops here, so let's add in 2, left click to add them, and right click to keep them in the center. Let me go into wireframe so you can see this a little bit better. Okay, and then we'll just scale them apart in the Z direction. Whoops. Okay, so you can see right now we're scaling from the 3D cursor. So I'm going to hit period and change it to median point and scale that apart now. There we go. And I'll zoom in here a little closer and scale in Z and kind of refine that. Something that should work. I'll add in a couple more edge loops to sharpen things up. Something like that, and like that. And probably one there. And 2 there. And I will scale these out along the y-axis as well. Okay. And right-click Shade Smooth. So you see there's still some weird shading here, and that's just because this is one big long face, which is not a great thing. So what we will do is we'll just add in like 3 edge loops for now. It's going to cut down on that significantly. Okay, so we have our first I-beam. Let's take this opportunity to name it. And we will call this Truss Upright. Now there's going to be a lot of duplication here, so naming it when you create the object is going to be important. Otherwise you're going to have 20 duplicates to rename. So make sure you stay on that. Also, it appears as though I did not name my vending machine block. So it's just a roughed in object that'll get more attention in the future. Alright, so we have our I-beam, which is looking pretty good. Yeah, it's maybe a little bit on the bulky side. So I might select that face loop and just actually I'll do it this way. I'm going to go into wireframe, select these vertices, and I'm going to move them all in. That way I don't affect this distance here, whereas if I would scale it, we'd compress them. So I'll just move it in a little bit more. And I'll do the same thing here, G, Y, something like that. Okay, cool. I'm happy with that. We can go on and continue building this truss out. So the first thing I'm going to do is do the second truss piece, and to do that I'm going to duplicate this. Normally I would say Shift D, but in this case I'm going to go with Alt D, and that's going to make a linked duplicate. So Alt D, all right, and then X to constrain it to the X-axis, and that looks about a good distance apart. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So a linked duplicate is one that shares the same object data. So this little green triangle, if I select it, you can see up here at the top, the object data is called cube. It's got 2 users. So practically what that means is if I make a change to 1, it will change all of them. Okay. And so it's, you know, some of the same flexibility as an array modifier, but a little bit more flexibility with it. Now you'll also notice though that this duplicate does not have the same. Oh, it does. Never mind. Just kidding. In edit mode, it doesn't have the same modifiers, but in object mode, it does. So we're fine there. Okay, so we have that, and again, because we named this, we got truss upright and upright 01. I'm not going to go through and name the individual iterations. That will work enough for me. I'm also going to select these two, though. At this point, I'm going to hit M to move. Make sure you're in object mode, but M, move to a new collection, and I'm just going to call this truss. Click OK. In our outliner, we now have those two in a collection. I'm also going to click on this little box collection icon, and I'm going to make sure that's highlighted. Okay, so you can see now there's a very slight highlight. I wish this was a little bit more obvious, but there's a very slight highlight on the box that tells us that that is the active collection. So any new objects that we add are going to automatically be added to that collection. Okay. So now what we need to do is figure out all of the cross pieces, and we can look back at our reference here. I'm using this as a reference because it's got more detail. So we've got one cross at the bottom, and then we have a bunch of diagonal ones. So we're going to start at the bottom, and we'll work our way up, and then we'll do the brackets at the end. Okay. So the way that I'm going to do this is because, from what I could tell, the whole truss is built with the same I-beams. Like, there's not a smaller version. They're shorter, but they're not like narrower or anything like that. So I'm going to take our original upright again, and I'm going to Alt-D to duplicate that one more time. Okay, and then I'm going to first rename this, and we're going to call this cross piece. Okay, and I'm going to rotate this around the y-axis 90 degrees. Hit enter. Okay, and then in front view, we'll move this up to about there. Okay. At this point, I'm also going to select these three and hit number pad slash and just go into local view. Okay, so I have this. Now we just need to take this, and I did a linked duplicate here. I actually probably should have just done a regular duplicate because I don't want this to be the exact same as the other two. So right now, if I go in here and scale it along the x-axis, they all change. I suppose I could scale it in the Z, but I'm just going to instead make this its own unique object. So with that selected, I can go to my object data, which is, again, this green triangle, and just click on this 3. It's going to make that its own user, basically. So now in edit mode, select everything, and I only want to scale in the X direction, and actually I like where it is here. So what I'm going to do is in object mode, Shift S and cursor to selected, and then I'm going to hit period and change my pivot point to the 3D cursor. You can also do that up here at the top and change it to the pivot, transform pivot point to 3D cursor. And now in object mode, I can select everything, scale along the X-axis, and there we go. Then we can zoom in here. Let's see, I'm going to go, and I want to narrow this gap a little bit, so in object mode, and I'm doing this in object mode because I want to keep the origin. Let me shift right click. I want to keep the origin at the bottom here. So once I have that, then I can Shift S and cursor it back to selected, back into object mode, and then scale X right to there. You could snap if you could find a vertex, but it's close enough to eyeball it. These are all going to be, they're going to have brackets over it, so you're not really going to see that intersection, but I want it to be a little bit closer. Okay, so we've got that done. Turn that off. And now we can move on to our diagonal pieces. Let me just double check our references here. And they roughly go at 45. I don't know if it's exactly 45, but that's fine. I'm going to start with this cross piece, and I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it and Z to move it up. Now for this piece, one I've made, again, it's Shift D, it's not a linked duplicate, it's its own thing. I'm going to rename this angled beam. So just going to change this to beam just because I want them to name the same thing. Okay, so this angled beam, and when I previously rotated this, I rotated this in object mode. And the reason for that is that it keeps our rotations. It remembers those. And that's going to be important here in a second. But I do want to move this pivot point, or move the origin to a corner. So I'm going to go into wireframe here, vertex select, or object mode, and then vertex select. And okay, what I think I'm going to need to do, I'm going to apply the mirror modifier because I want to get the vertex right at the center. Yeah. I can always add the modifier again later if I need it. But so in object mode, and I'll just apply that, and then we can go back into edit mode. Okay. So front view, wireframe, and I'm going to select just these corner vertices. If it will let me deselect, come on. Okay. Things seem to have stopped clicking. Okay, I fixed it. I somehow had the collection hidden, which when you hide the collection but not the objects below it, you can't actually make any selections. So I don't know what hotkey I hit to do that, but that's what happened. So front view, wireframe, I'm going to zoom in here, just select the corner vertices. Okay, and then I can hit Shift S, cursor to selected, tab into object mode, and object set origin to 3D cursor. And again, I have that on Q on my quick menu. Okay. So we've got that, and I just realized I put that on the wrong corner. So let's do that again, but this time in the top corner. So we'll grab that one. Okay. There we go. Shift S, cursor to selected. So I did that really fast. That's the nice thing about gestural controls is when you get used to them, you can hit Shift S, wait, and then move down and click. But you can also just really quickly do those sorts of things. And now that I've messed all that up, very quickly change between. So like with Z for your viewport shading, right? It's super fast. So I will try to call out what I'm doing and not completely gloss over that, but that's what I'm doing. So I've got the cursor where I want it, and Q origin to 3D cursor. Okay. So I did all that so that I can go into front view here, and now I can rotate that. And I'm going to rotate that 45 degrees. Again, this is in object mode. This is important that you do this in object mode. So 45, I'm going to tap negative to reverse the direction, and hit enter. Okay, so the reason I did this in object mode, and we can see our rotations here, is because I want to maintain the local direction, my local transform, so that I can go into edit mode here, hit A to select everything, and then I can scale it along that local Z direction. So if I tap Z once, it's only going to scale it in Z, but if I tap it a second time, you can see up here on the top left it says, whoops, a scale along local Z, and so I can scale that right up there. It's not going to change the X or the Y dimensions, it's only going to change the length, and that's because I did that in object mode. Okay? So if you did that in edit mode, so what you would want to do is get this, here, let's see if I can, let's do this. Alright, object mode, I'm going to hit Alt-R to clear the rotation. Now if I rotated this initially 90 degrees here, and then RZ negative 45 there, oops. You see even R and, oh no, we want to go RY negative 45. So I do that in edit mode. You see the object rotation hasn't changed here. Okay, the components, their rotation has changed, but the object itself in object mode has not changed rotation. So now when I try to scale it in local Z, it's still going vertically. So what you'd want to do is undo those rotations, or just get it back to vertical, and then rotate it back up. So we'll do that. Tab R. I guess in this case I can just go 45. So I don't need to go down to 90 and back up to 45. Oops. SZZ. There we go. I want to go into front view, and that's going to change my perspective to orthographic. It also looks like my rotation's got a little screwy. So I'm going to undo a few times so my rotations aren't weird. Okay. So object mode RZ45, oops, RY45, there we go. Edit mode, S, double tap Z to scale along the local axis. If you're not sure what your local orientation is, you can always bring up say the move tool and change your transform orientation to local, and then it'll show you what it is. I like to work with the manipulator off. To me it's just in the way, but I certainly understand if it helps, especially early on, just remembering where you are and which way is up. So, okay. So now that I have that in position, if we look back at our reference, we have them going both ways, and you could do this with just one beam and an array modifier and a object offset if you used an empty to move it up and rotate it around and move it over, but it might get kind of weird. It It might be tricky. So instead, we're going to just make, if I turn off the array modifier, you can see, we're just going to do 2, and then we'll use an array modifier to go the rest of the way up. So I've got this selected, and I'm going to Alt. Oh no, actually, I was going to do a duplicate, but I don't want to. I want to do this in edit mode so that this all stays one object, because that array modifier is going to duplicate the object. If I did this in object mode and made them 2 separate objects, then I would need 2 array modifiers and the aligning would be a little bit trickier. So I've got that selected. I'll keep working in front view because I don't need to change the Y depth at all. And I'm going to hit Shift D, hit Z to move it up, and then I'm going to change my pivot point to the median point. Okay, you can also do that up here, but period also works. And then scale it along the x-axis -1. Okay. Actually, I'm curious here about how that affects the normals. It might be better to rotate it instead of scaling it. Yeah, they'll work. They're all right. It's easy enough if we get into trouble later to change that. Okay, so we've scaled it, so now it's going the other way. And we're going to move this up. And I want to move it probably up to about there. So if we look back at our reference here, we've got a gap in between them, and that's because this same bracket is used for the diagonal pieces and the horizontal one. So we need to make sure there's enough room there for that horizontal one to fit. One thing you could do is temporarily duplicate this beam, and that would give you a good indication of where it needed to be. Okay, so we have that. I'm pretty happy with that. We might end up making an adjustment to that later, but for now, that looks pretty good. And we can go to our modifier stack and add in an array modifier at this point. So by default, we do want relative offset, but we don't want in the x direction. We want to go in the z direction. Okay. So relative offset is taking into account the local transforms. So remember our local z direction, to bring up the move tool here, is going this way. So it's going to duplicate them in that direction. So instead, we want to go with a constant offset. And now, oh, no, it's still doing that. Okay. So what we can do is, I guess we have a couple of options. We can either apply the rotate. I think we'll do it that way. Yeah. So we could use an object offset and like add an empty and make that be what drives it up. But the simpler way, we'll keep it on relative offset. The simpler way to do it is just to apply the rotation. So now that we've used the rotation to scale it appropriately, we don't need this anymore. We can actually, if we apply it, it'll make this the normal, the 0, and that'll make the array modifier work the way we want it to. So I'm going to select that object in object mode, and you can either go to object apply, which is Control A, apply rotation, or you can just hit Control A and apply rotation. And now it snaps in line exactly where we want it to. But we got to keep in mind we don't want it exactly at 1 because we still need that gap here. So if we zoom in here, we can actually use, let's use the measure tool because I haven't used that yet. So I can use the measure tool, and looks like it's 0.17 meters. Okay. So we can go over here, go back to our select tool, select this, and we'll bring that up a little bit. So we can't just type it in because 1.17 this is a percentage. When you're doing a relative offset, it's a percentage. So instead, I'm going to bring that measure tool back, and I'm just going to click and drag 0.17. Okay, close enough. And then we can adjust our offset, holding down Shift to make it finer tune adjustments. And it looks like we'll go 1.085. 1.087. That's probably needlessly specific. Let's see, and I gotta remember how to delete this. Yeah, I think you just hover over it and hit X, and it will delete the measurement tool. Okay, as long as you have the measurement tool active, I assume. I've not worked with it a lot, but so now that we have that, we can adjust our array modifier and do a count of 3. You see the beams don't quite line up, so we've got a few different options here. We can either apply the array modifier and just get rid of this top one, which is probably what we'll do. We could also extend these beams up, but if we leave local view, we don't really need it to go up all the way like that. I think where it is fine, but you can make that decision for yourself. It's not really going to affect things either way. So I will apply the array modifier, because if I need to get it back, it's pretty quick to just select and do that. So in object mode, we'll apply it. I'll go back in edit mode, and this top beam right here, I'm going to hover over it and hit L. It's going to select linked, and then I can delete those vertices. And that's all gone now. Great. Okay, so we've got all of our beams in place. Now we can get to the little bracket. Oops, wrong one. That one. That holds them on. So this is what we'll do next. And just kind of a quick preview so you understand where we're going. This is just a... Let me just hide all of the modifiers here. This is all it is. It's a flat plane, and then I added a solidify modifier, and then a bevel, subdivision, and a mirror modifier to put it on the backside. But that's it. Super simple. And yeah, let's do it. So, back in here, in our correct scene. Again, I'm going to select these pieces and numberpad / to go into local view. And we will start... Actually, I'm going to, again, temporarily duplicate this and move it up. Oops, Z to X direction because it's rotated, but I'm going to move it up. Yeah, because this object has a rotation, I haven't applied the rotation here. If I want to go vertically in the scene in global space, I actually have to go constrain it along the x-axis because my orientation is set to local. If I set it to global, then I can set it. Then I can hit Z to go up with it. So transform orientations can get a little bit confusing, but as you start working with them, you'll get more comfortable with them, especially global and local. Okay, so we know we want basically this sort of shape. Apologies, I'm drawing with a mouse. It's terrible. So I'm going to first shift right click right there to set my 3D cursor. And you can see it popped that right on the surface, which is what I want. And I'm going to hit Shift A, add in object mode, add in a plane. Before I do that, I'm going to make sure my truss collection is selected. Okay. So Shift A, add in a plane. We're going to rename this. We're going to call this truss plate. Okay, and then tab in edit mode. A to make sure we have everything selected. We're going to rotate it around the x-axis 90 degrees. And then we can scale it down. Okay. And here I think working in wireframe is going to be helpful, so we can see our reference points. I'm going to move these two vertices in along the x-axis. I'm going to leave it overhanging a little bit. I want to get some imperfections in this. And then we can move these in something like that. And then height-wise, we'll scale it down a little bit. Actually, no, we won't. The bottom, we'll bring the bottom down a little bit, and the top we will bring here to about there. Okay, that works. Now we need to add in these tapers. So the easiest way to do that, I'm going to select these two vertices in vertex mode, so hit 1, and right-click, and I'm going to bevel the vertices. Shift-Control-B is the shortcut. I'm going to bevel those vertices, and it works much like you would bevel an edge, but it's just vertex. But I'm going to scroll down. I just want to have a flat edge. I don't want to have any roundness, so no subdivisions there. And we'll go until those vertices kind of sit right in between there. That looks pretty good. Yeah. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to select everything, and I'm going to scale it up a little bit too. I want to have a little bit more overlap than I did in my reference. And then we can move these back in, because I don't need that to hang over quite as much. Okay, great. So, I'm just looking at it, and yeah, I suppose if you wanted to be a little bit more accurate, you might like chop off the edges, so these beams would lay flush, and then the rivets would make sense. But I'm not super concerned about structural integrity here. It just has to look decent, and I think it does. So the next thing we need to do is, this is a big old n-gon right now, and I don't want that, so we need to fix that. And the way that I'm going to do that is super easy. I'm going to bring up my knife tool with K. I'm going to make sure that when I hover over this vertex, that little green box should have a red outline that tells you you're on the vertex. If you're not on the vertex, you can see that red outline goes away. So on the vertex, I'm going to cut that straight across, hit return, and then I'll do the same thing down here. Okay. Now, if you really want to get specific, you can then select the vertices you just added, G, Z, hold down Control, and snap them so it's perfectly horizontal. Your choice. Also, you can see that these vertices here aren't quite lined up. I'm going to select all of those, just move them out a little bit. Yeah, that's better. Okay. Cool. And then I want to give myself a little bit better, or a little bit more control with the topology. So I'm going to select all of those faces and hit I to inset them a little bit. Something like that, I think will work. And then, yeah, okay. I think we're good with that. You can see that the vertices here aren't even anymore. Doesn't really matter, but it does bother me. So I will just select those three and scale them to 0. Okay, cool. So now we have that. All that modeling is done. Now it's just a few more modifiers. We're going to start with our solidify modifier. Okay, you can see by default it's going in. So we want to, I wonder if, yeah, we'll just set that offset to +1. Okay, and I want to go with a similar but slightly different thickness to the I-beam, just because. We'll go something like that. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. We'll click even thickness on there, and we can collapse the solidify modifier. Next, I'm going to add a bevel modifier. Okay, you can see what that does. We can adjust the steps, adjust that amount, bring that down. Okay. I'm also going to right click and shade smooth. There's our bevel modifier, and then we can go and add a subsurface modifier. Bring that up to 2. And then, did I have a 4th modifier on here? Oh, I did, yes. The mirror modifier. We'll come to that in a minute. Actually, no, we're going to come to it right now, I believe. Okay. So now that we have the plate created, we need to duplicate it all over this place. So at all the intersections as well as on the backside. Incidentally, you could keep this cross piece here. I didn't on this one. But if you wanted to, if you'd like that look, you could keep that cross piece here. Before I start duplicating them all around, I'm going to first add it to the backside, and that's easy with a mirror modifier. So we'll add the mirror modifier, and what we need to do, you see by default it goes over here and makes a little stop sign. We want to go in the Y direction, but the center right now is the origin of the piece, and we actually want the center of the mirror to be the center of the whole truss. And as it turns out, this vertical I-beam, its center, its origin, is exactly where we want the mirror to be. So I can select this piece and set the mirror object. Just click a little eyedropper, click on the beam, and because we are working in the center, and we're working symmetrically, that just snaps right into place. Cool. And we can collapse the mirror modifier. I'm going to leave the subsurface open because I find I change that occasionally. But you can collapse all those if you prefer. Alright, so we have that. I'm going to go back into front view. And I'm going to do all the next duplication from front view because I don't need to move it in the Y direction. I don't need to move it in the depth. I just need to move it left and right and up and down. So if I do all my transforms from front view, then it will stay in that direction. Okay. So all these duplicates are going to be linked duplicates. So instead of Shift D, I'm going to do Alt D. And I'm going to just place these by hand. I don't want to use an array modifier, and I don't want to be very specific because I want to keep some unevenness, some variation, and just make it feel a little bit more real. So I will start Alt D, and I'll bring it down here. Okay. Do something like that. And then go back up here, Alt D, and tell you what, I'm just going to do a bunch of them to start, and then I'll come in after zoomed in and reposition them. So this one we need to rotate, so I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees, and roughly there. Okay, that doesn't line up exactly, but we can fix that in a minute. Alt D, Alt D, Alt D. And we don't need one up there. Okay. So now let's go back and fix all these positions, or just refine them. Like I said, I'm not being too precious with it. Just getting it in the ballpark of where I want it to be. And maybe this one actually doesn't hang off the edge. Maybe it's pushed forward a little bit, so it'll help it not feel too uniform. And if we're going for more of a rundown sort of environment, then that will help. Okay. Now we've got a couple of additional things to fix. This cap we want to actually change. If we look at our reference here, you can see that cap is a little bit different. And then this bottom piece, we need to line up a little bit better. So all we have to do is select these two, G, Z, and just do that. So that was an easy one. Up here we're going to take a little bit more work. Now, again, this is a linked duplicate, so that means if I make any changes to this mesh, it's going to affect all of them. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to select it, go to my object data properties, click this 8, and it's going to make that its own unique user. And now I can make some changes. By but I can't really see my mesh because I've got the solidify modifier on it. So I'm going to go to my modifier stack and just turn off or temporarily disable all the modifiers. And really all I need to do is delete these vertices. And if I want to keep this nice kind of border edge going, which I do, I can just move this up, and I can move this up a little bit. We'll move it up and line that up, and then we can select these edges and fill them. Okay. Maybe we bring this up just a little bit more. Something like that. And now we can turn all of our modifiers back on. Beautiful. And actually, I'm also going to just select those top vertices and just move them down a little bit. There we go. Okay. So that's it for those. The last thing we need to do is the rivets, and the rivets are going to be super easy. I'm just going to actually we'll shift right click. Let's put the 3D cursor on the surface there, and shift A, add in you could do a UV sphere here for these rivets, but if we look at the UV sphere, the ends of it, the tops of it are triangles, and it can be really tough to make that smooth and look good. So instead, we're going to just undo that. I'm going to add in a cube. And we're going to give that a subsurface modifier, set that to 3, and apply it. And that gives you a mostly sphere. And then to make it fully a sphere, we can go to edit mode, make sure everything is selected. And then let's see, I never remember where this is in the menus. I think it's Mesh Transform to Sphere. There it is. Shift Alt S is the shortcut. But to Sphere, and then you'll see as I move back and forth, it goes from not very spheres to a perfect sphere. You can also just type in 1 and hit return to give that 100% to sphere. You see this pops up and you can change that. Okay, so now it's a perfect sphere with no triangles, which is cool. Go to side view here, and going to scale it down. Let's scale that down a little bit more. That looks pretty good. Alright, so side view. Scale it along the y-axis to kind of flatten it out a little bit. And then I'm going to select all the back half vertices and delete those. Okay. Oops. We can shade that smooth now. And we want to add a couple more edges. So I want to keep one little sharp edge there. And then I'm going to select this back edge, and I'm going to hit E to extrude it, scale it down just a little bit. And maybe add one more edge loop in there. Okay, so we got just a little bit of a rim there. And I think that's going to be good enough. I don't think we'll need to add a subsurface modifier to it. You could, but depending on how strong your computer is, having a bunch of these duplicated around when they take up a bunch of faces may not be necessary. But you could, kind of your call. Okay, so we've got our rivet looking good. Now, we just need to position it. So it's already on the surface because we moved the 3D cursor there. We're going to move one down about here. Make sure to rename this. I'll call it Truss Rivet. Oops, I named it Rivet. Let's get rid of that. Okay. I'm also going to move this to a new collection. You can see it's going to remove from local view, so I'll go get out of local view, hit M, new collection, and we'll call this rivets. Okay. And then in my outliner here, I'm going to click and drag the rivets into the truss, so it's a sub-collection of the truss collection, and click on rivets to make sure that's the active one. Okay, so now we just need to do a bunch of duplication. Alright, so we got that one where we want it, Alt-D, and we'll move that one up. Again, I'm going to just place these manually. I'm not going to use any constraining axes or anything like that. Let me check my reference here. Okay. Yeah, you can see I've got them closer together and then on the outside. That makes more sense. So we'll move this one down and this one up. Alt-D. Okay, just give it to look like it's doing something, even if it isn't actually doing anything. We can pretend. We're artists, we can pretend. Oops. Okay. Let's see. We'll do that. Okay. So we've got these four. Oh, I also should have put a modifier on that. So let's do that now. Okay. So we're going to add in a mirror modifier again, and again set the mirror object to this truss. And make sure we go in the Y direction. There we go. Now we need to do that to these other rivets as well. So I'm going to select all three of those, and then select the one that already has the modifier last, and Control L to make links to the modifiers. And basically it's going to copy whatever modifiers this one has to the rest of them. It's a very handy tool. So now it's on both sides. Looks good. Oops. There we go. Okay. I'm going to bring this one down a little bit. That's better. Okay. So now I can select these four and just do a bunch of Alt-D duplication. Alt-D, and move it up. Let's see, make sure we're roughly where we want to be. Okay. Alt-D. Good. Alt-D, move this one all the way down here. And I'll refine these here in a second. Alt-D, rotate 180. Alt-D, Alt-D. Okay, so now we can go back and refine these. That one we're going to put right about there. These four. Let's make sure I only have those selected. I'll go like there. Also, this looks like it got moved a little bit. Do that. Okay. Yeah, okay. And these four actually look pretty good. These four. You could also move these individually if you want to give them more variation. I'm just going to keep them like this. We need to move this one up. And then we'll do that and that. And then up at the top here, we don't need this one. Move this one down here. This one. There. And I don't think we need that one either. Okay. So there's our truss. That's everything. The last thing we need to do is just move it. So I'm trying to think the best way to move this. We could parent everything to one object, which I think is, yeah, I think we'll do that. So I'm going to, in the outliner, make sure I have my subcollection expanded. I'm going to select the first thing, scroll down, shift, and select the last thing. It's going to select all those objects. I'm then going to hold down shift and select the beam, the very first beam we made. I'm going to hit Control P. It's going to set the parent to the object. I'll say keep transform out of habit. Okay, there we go. So now we can collapse the rivets too. Everything is parented to that truss upright. So wherever this goes, everything else will follow. And you can see these relationship lines because they're all going to point to the origin of its parent object. If you want to get rid of those, that you just have to go up here to the viewport overlays and turn off relationship lines, and they'll go away. Okay. So let's position it. I'm going to top view here, and we'll move it all the way over there-ish. Obviously this location is subject to change, and we'll maybe move it down a little bit. But there's our truss. So I promised last time we would do some pipes, and let's see if I can do this in the next 3 minutes to keep this video under an hour. Okay, so we're going to do, whoops. No, what is this one? Okay, sorry for the quick switching. These pipes. Okay, that's what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to come over here, go in the top view, shift right click to place my 3D cursor, and shift A, add in a cylinder. I'm going to tab and edit, oops, before I do that, sorry. Now I got to delete that cylinder, shift A, add in a cylinder. I'm going to set the vertices to, we'll do 12, why not? Okay. And now I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to move it along the z-axis 1 unit, because the default cylinder is 2 units tall, and I want it sitting on the ground. So that'll bring that ground up. You can also just grab the bottom vertices and snap them up. And then we'll grab the top vertices and move those down. Wireframe, I'm going to select the ends and delete those faces. I don't need those faces. I'll select everything, scale, Shift-Z. Okay. And then in object mode, I'm going to move it out along the y-axis a little bit. Okay, so now what we need to do is use the spin modifier, or not modifier, the spin tool. This is, so we roughly have the diameter of the pipe that we want. Sorry, I'm hitting all the wrong buttons right now. Just select that, period. Okay. Maybe we'll scale it down a little bit more. Okay. I think that will work. Oh, we're running out of time here. All right. So I'm going to select this top edge loop, and I'm going to go over here to the toolbar, T if it's not visible already, and click on Spin. And you see we got this little blue semicircle pop up. And the properties, I'm going to click to my tool options, and I want to go around the x-axis. And then I'm going to start. Oh, cool, it just quit on me. That's my favorite thing. Okay. Well, I guess in that one we won't be doing that. I'll just do that here. Okay, so we have this. I'll duplicate this, move it over. And then I'm going to delete all of my new vertices. Oops. We undo that. I want to keep that one. Okay. We'll delete those vertices, select that, go to our spin tool, and our tool settings over here. We want to go in the X direction. And I can't see my manipulator, which is weird. Oh, it's all the way over there. Okay, so I'm just going to start moving that. Oh, it's because I'm pivoting around the 3D cursor and not the median point, I think. So let me undo that. Set the pivot point to the median point. No, still doing that. Okay. So we're going to start moving it. And then we need to move our, basically our pivot point here. And we also need to set our angle to, in this case I did 75 degrees. I didn't want it to go completely 90. But we can just kind of move this around to get the angle that we want. It might be helpful to do this in side view. Okay, and once you have that angle, then all you have to do is extrude it. So we'll say extrude, and then let's see, we can try. Yeah, I think I'll just have to move this in place manually. That sort of thing. Okay, and then for the rest of it, all I did was add some edge loops and scale it out to get it to line up with the wall. Once we had it kind of in place, I used, I believe I used shear actually, which is this tool right here. And this will kind of, it'll flatten it out, but it'll keep the same vertical height. So you can see the vertices are only moving left and right. So I'm going to bring that down close to 0, and then I'll just scale it in the y-axis the rest of the way. Okay, and then it's just, yeah, you can add in an edge loop. Select the faces and extrude, right-click to keep it in the same place, and Alt-S to scale along the normals. And there you have it. That pipe's a little askew, but that's how that works. Yeah, and so next week we will start adding a little bit more detail. We'll kind of figure out what that vending machine is going to be, I think, and maybe a couple of other things, but that'll be it for this week. Okay, I do have one quick addendum here. Just the reason why the spin manipulator was all the way over here is because it actually starts, or is positioned where the 3D cursor is. So what you want to do is select either the vertex or the edge that is facing the direction you want it to spin. Okay, and then Shift S, cursor to selected. Now, when you do the spin tool, it's going to be centered appropriately. And you can do all the transforms that you need to do. Although make sure you actually select the whole edge. Okay, so now you can do that whole thing, and it works a lot better. Okay, that's it now. For real this time.